One of the most common comments I still get to this day concerning Tonex is folks will say to me that they wish that there was a way to save a different global input trim setting per preset. Well, there always has been, and I've done videos on this in the past, but there's so much misinformation spread about this that folks believe the wrong thing a lot of times. And today I'm going to let you hear it for yourself. Between the software and the pedal, we're going to compare changing the global input trim to different settings in comparison to just adjusting the gain control within a tone model. And I think you'll see that it is the same thing, and we should just be, as I've suggested in the past, set our global input trim once, and then regardless of what tone model you're using, you can make tweaks to the gain control within that tone model to get what you need and what you want from each particular tone model, save it in a preset, and move on. Let's put this to bed once and for all. Let's go right over to both Tonex software and Tonex pedal, which you're going to see up on screen, so you can decide for yourself if it is the same thing, so that you don't have to always be going in and changing and messing around with your global input trim. All right, so a quick little explanation of my methodology here. What I've done is I have recorded a DI'd guitar track. If I just solo this track here and bypass Cubase, you can hear what this sounds like. Just my guitar DI'd into my audio interface. I've duplicated that track. Now I'm going to re-enable Tonex software here. I've loaded up one of my latest Tonex collections, which is of my incredible Dr. Z Z28 Mark II amp. This collection is really spectacular. I absolutely love the way this sounds. They're available at the link below. So I've decided to use the JS Z28 DC Alt OD1. So now if you hear this same playback with Tonex engaged, you'll notice it's just a tone model, no reverb, noise gate compression. I don't want to mess around with anything else. You can hear how that sounds. Now, I've duplicated that track so we're hearing the identical performance between these. And that's going to be super, super important. I've also volume matched these. So if I disengage this here now, what you're going to find that I am doing here, and you can see I have two other tracks. I have one called pedal here. So this is the reamp output. So what I'm doing is I'm sending this out of one of the line outputs of my audio interface into a reamp box, carefully measured so it is hitting the front of the pedal with the exact same input trim as we would be hitting the software with. And that's super, super important. And you'll get to hear that as I A/B these. You'll hear that they sound basically identical, even though this is actually going through a whole other series of digital to analog and analog to digital conversions. It's shocking how similar the pedal sounds to the software, even though it's going through those extra conversions when we're set up properly and hitting it with the right amount of input gain. So basically now without the software control soloed, if I play this, you're hearing the same thing as the software was playing. Now, what we're going to do is we'll just A/B this back and forth. You can hear they sound essentially identical. Now, what I've done here is I've created a marker track so that I could just come in here and select a very short snippet here, which is what we're going to use to compare. Because if we listen through the entire track that I just played you, it's very hard to compare the two because we're going to hear differences in the different parts of the playing. But if we go down to just a couple chord hits like this is the software you're hearing. It's very easy to compare the sound of the software versus the pedal. So we want to just start off here. Everything is the same. The input trim on my pedal is set to -3. If I go straight into my global settings here down to input trim, you will see here I'm at -3, and that is going to correspond exactly with where my audio interface is set so that we hear the same thing. And let's listen to this short little snippet just to hear how close these actually are. So that was me switching back and forth between hearing the pedal, even though it's going through those extra conversions, and the software, and I don't think anybody's going to argue that those sound pretty much identical. So now on to the test here. The question is the gain control right here just controlling things in the same way that the input trim is? And the answer to that is yes, but I'm going to prove that to you now. So I create my tone models to sound exactly as they were captured with the input trim on Tonex pedal set to -3. Now some folks say, well, I don't set my pedal to -3, so I can't use your tone models, your captures. They're not going to work. And that couldn't be further from the truth. So we'll set it to +8, which seems to be an area that a lot of folks seem to set it with. It has probably dates back to when there was that built-in 8 dB boost. Whatever, it doesn't matter, it's not important. But what is the problem is if you load my tone model up like you're going to hear here, now you're going to hear an oversaturated tone compared to how it was actually captured. How it was actually captured was like this. Pedal at +8. It's not going to sound bad, but it is going to be oversaturated, right? So the question is can we just with the gain control bring that back to sound just like the software so we don't have to come into our global settings all the time? So we'll leave our global settings at 8. Now, you'll notice here that if I go back to my gain control, I'm set to 5, which is the default setting, and where it's supposed to sound right when hit with the right amount of input. But now we want it to sound basically like this. But the input trim is making it too saturated. So what if I come back and just control the gain down? Bring that to about 2.6 on the gain. Now I can save that within the preset, but let's compare that to the software and how this is supposed to sound with the input trim on -3. Again, indistinguishable now that we've adjusted the gain control properly. So all we've done is we've adjusted the gain control, which is just another input trim control. It says that right in the Tonex manual, but people don't want to believe it. It's going to be exactly the same as adjusting the global input trim. We don't need to go in and ever adjust that again. If you have your pedal set at +8 and you grab one of my tone models and it sounds too saturated, just simply go to the tone model, bring the gain down from, let's say, 5 down to around 2.6, 2.7, or wherever you feel it sounds closest to what you want. It's going to be the same thing as going and changing that input trim. So it's really not a big deal. Does it work the other way around? So what about if we were back to this 5 setting here, but we were still at +8 on the global input trim setting within Tonex pedal? Obviously, again, this is going to be oversaturated on the pedal. But could I make the software sound much more like that? Watch what happens when I take this gain and crank it. Again, we pretty much have an indistinguishable sound from one another. So basically by utilizing the gain control, I was able to have these match almost identically. And I'm just doing this in a really rough, quick manner, but you'll see that when we match levels properly and have the volume levels match when we're listening back, a lot of these perceived differences a lot of people think they hear go away very, very quickly. Now let's come back here and we're going to come down to the software down here and I am going to actually boost my tone model up by +8. So what if somebody was making their captures to expect a much higher signal, but I'm running my pedal at -3? Could I get my pedal just utilizing the gain control, which we have right now set back at its default 5, right? So if someone created the tone model to sound like this in the software, to want that higher amount of input trim hitting it, and you'll notice I did it down here in the input slider or knob within Tonex software, can I get the pedal to sound like that by boosting the gain control because I'm set back on -3 here? So let's go over to the pedal. You'll notice less saturated in the software now, but let's just bring that gain control up. And think you'll notice that very quickly I can get those sounding almost indistinguishable from one another. So again, just to reiterate, the global input trim and the gain knob within the preset are doing the same thing. They are simply just adjusting the amount of input gain that is hitting the front of the tone model, and it's going to decide how much more or less saturated that tone model is. So I hope that that puts that to rest, to realize that we can just set our global input trim one time. That probably to set it to the place that's going to work with the vast majority of tone models we use. But if we do use a tone model made by somebody else that was designed to utilize more or less input level than what we have our global input level set to, we can just use that gain level to compensate, get the exact same results, and then save that per preset. So even if we're using, let's say, a low output guitar to a high output guitar, and we want the low output guitar to have a little more input oomph to it hitting the front of that tone model, don't go in and mess around with your global input trim. Just simply boost the gain control up on that tone model. Save that as a specific preset for that particular guitar, and you're off to the races and you never have to think about it again. So I really am just trying to get folks to be able to work in a much more efficient manner, and I hope that that helps, and I hope that that kind of clears up what still seems to be quite a common misconception. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please share this video with as many people as you can. I think it's a very important topic, and I think it's something that needs to be much better understood for folks who are using Tonex. It doesn't have to be complicated. This is not anybody's fault. It's just the way that these things work. The more level we send into an amplifier in the real world or into a digital model of an amplifier, the more it's going to saturate. The less we send in, the less it's going to saturate. That is just the way it works. But once we understand this, it doesn't have to be complicated, and we can be off to the races very quickly. So please like the video. As I said, share it with anybody you think would get some use or enjoyment out of watching it. Also, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back very, very soon with some more. I hope you enjoy the music on the way out. The links are below to any of the tone models you heard in today's video.